This podcast was brought to you by Doatech. Most companies would give up after being taken apart by ninja clans, but not Doatech. They are truly dedicated to their martial arts bioweapons. Hello and welcome to Monkey Broadcast, a monthly review and discussion show with me, the Jonin Monkey.
And me, Sven the Crusader. If at any point in this review I sneeze my head off, blame the cottonwoods.
Yes, summer still rages on and the pollen is still thick in the air, but still here we are in the month of September where the school holidays have finished and, conveniently enough, mainly for segue purposes, we'll also be reviewing the end of a long-running series, more specifically, Bleach.
Strap yourselves in, folks.
Indeed. But before we can get to what I'm sure will be a bundle of fun from start to finish, we have to start things off with our first section, which is...
Q&A!
This is the section where we answer questions from the audience. If you'd like us to answer your questions, either leave them in the comments or send them to me via Twitter with the hashtag MBQuestion.
Our first question comes from McDuck.
If Quiditch was a real sport, would it be interesting to watch? After all, we're talking about a sport where catching a special ball grants you 150 points and ends the game instantly, versus 10 points for each goal.
Short answer, God, no.
I have a feeling I may have ranted about this before, but, I mean, the idea of a ball game that's based around flying brooms sounds cool and appealing. It is, well, let's be blunt, it's everything to do with the golden snitch, that's the problem.
Yeah, and the thing is, the game does not... By the way, I'm talking as a Harry Potter fan here. I've been a fan since 2001, so this is meant in no way as a general criticism of the series, but Quiditch is silly. The game only ends when someone catches the snitch. That sounds fine in theory, but Goblet of Fire elaborates that at one point that actually caused the game to go on for 6 months, so screw that.
Yeah, I mean, you can have games which do day series, like with cricket and stuff, but even then, it's just kind of taking the piss to have games go on indefinitely. I mean, if nothing else, it would be incredibly impractical for scheduling purposes, because, yeah, a soccer game can go over if you have extra time. Quidditch, there is no generalized time, because at least the extra time, it's like an extra 30 minutes. Scheduling companies can make plans for that. Quidditch, even the standard time, it could be over in 10 minutes before you know.
Yeah, and speaking of which, what if the teams are just really bad? I mean, my god, just imagine, say, to use American football terms, a preliminary round between two really bad Quidditch teams, like the Quidditch answers to the Cleveland Browns and the Indianapolis Colts. That game would never end.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most painful experiences of my life was watching England versus Albania, and I think it was the last World Cup at the time of recording. Correction. It was, in fact, England versus Algeria in the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. Long story short, it was a 0-0 draw that dragged on for 90 minutes with neither team getting anywhere near the goal in one of the most boring matches I've ever experienced in my life. But here's the thing. That match had to end because, again, they only had 90 minutes to play in. If that match had to go on indefinitely until someone scored, I think the game might have ended due to an audience riot.
Knowing soccer fans, that's not far off the mark, but in that case it would be justified.
I think it would be the one case of English hooliganism that is justified, but anyway.
But, yeah, short answer, Quidditch. Great in theory, in practice, not so much.
Our next question comes from Vice of Legend, and he asks,
When are we going to get a good Superman game? Injustice doesn't count.
Okay, I'm gonna get my smartass answer out of the way now. It's Superman. We're never going to get a good Superman game.
Well, to get an answer from someone who actually kind of likes Superman...
Yes, please take this over from me.
Well, I would say... The problem is... I think it's how you make the game. I mean, in the comment that originally started this question, Vice mentioned maybe a Telltale style game would be good for Superman, and I thought about it, and the funny thing is, Telltale are currently in the middle of a series that's based around Batman, but the more I think about it, the more I think Superman would be a better choice. Because here's the thing. An action-based Superman game is kind of tricky given that, well, to be blunt, part of the reasons why Sven doesn't like Superman is because he's nigh on invulnerable with a million superpowers at his disposal. Ergo, it's really hard to find villains that can actually, last 5 minutes against him.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the start of a good Superman game would be, beta testing it and actually working out glitches. I may despise Superman with every fiber of my comic-loving being, which isn't many fibers, to be fair, but even I recognize that, to quote a YouTuber I just recently watched, Superman 64 was doo-doo. And not at all indicative of a Superman game, a DC game, hell, a comic book game.
Yeah, but the reason why I said a Telltale game, or at least a game with a moral choice system, would be a better choice is that in an interview writer Max Landis gives, which I really wish I could remember the site so that I could recommend it, but he gives a good pitch for why anyone would like Superman, and he explains that it's not so much if Superman is going to win, but how he's going to win, because the whole crux of the point of Superman is, okay, I have these unbelievable superpowers, what do I do with them? What is the best way to win that satisfies everyone? And that's why a lot of people are pissed off with Man of Steel, because Superman is not the type of character who happily has a punching contest in the middle of a city, and just lets it all be demolished and lets people all die, because, again, to quote Max Landis, Superman is basically a nice guy with superpowers. He's one of the few superheroes whose parents didn't have to die, and he didn't have to be guilt-tripped into actually being a superhero. He just thought, well, I have powers, I might as well help people.
I've never actually thought of it like that. And I mean, to be fair, Superman has something over Batman that honestly is a big thing for me, and it's why I cannot enjoy Batman either. Superman saves people and fights super beings his size, whereas Batman just beats the shit out of hapless criminals.
Basically, yeah. I honestly think with Superman, that's a superhero that's focused more on how he goes about saving people. Like, yeah, he could obviously snap Lex Luthor's neck in a heartbeat if he really thought about it, but at the same time, he still wants to try and show Lex the better way. Greatest example of this is All-Star Superman. That would be perfect for a Telltale-style game, because, again, those games, let's face it, you very rarely die in the QTEs of a Telltale game anyway, so you might as well have a game that's focused more on Superman having to decide, okay, am I going to solve this by punching someone hard or talking to them first? But the problem is Telltale have their formula, and I think Minecraft is possibly the only franchise they've done ever since they've had this new moral choice system that isn't grim and gritty in some fashion. Like, let's face it, they had The Walking Dead, The Wolf Among Us, and now Batman, and Game of Thrones, let's not forget that. That's like the pinnacle of grim dark.
Oh god, yeah, we've been over that several times, myself included. I mean, hell, Telltale turned Monkey Island into grim dark. As a Monkey Island fan, let me just tell you, that is no mean feat.
Yeah, so I think Telltale are kind of fixated on that, which is a shame because, yeah, I think Superman would be a perfect fit for that, but no, Telltale seems to have this thing of either focusing on grimdark or having a character that's a stone's throw away of violence, hence why they picked Batman.
Yeah, pretty much. Again, see my constant issue with Batman.
Yeah. Otherwise, we're even gonna get a Superman game when people recognize that Superman's more about the moral choices, or like Sven said, when someone actually beta tests the game.
Yeah. I mean, again, I might not be the biggest fan of Superman, but at the very least, de-glitch your Superman games before you release them.
Indeed.
Our next question comes from Roy.
What is your opinion on the MCU as a whole so far?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts, but most of them boil down to less Joss Whedon, please.
Yeah, I can understand that. In my case, I kind of enjoy it so far. I mean, I know some people are kind of sick with the jokey action-adventure vibe that Joss Whedon is pretty much set up for all of the series, but I think it honestly depends on the movie. I mean, Age of Ultron is probably... There are some amusing scenes in there, but I think that's kind of where my limits were with the number of quips and jokey death scenes, I guess, because frankly that Hulk death of Ultron was really pointless, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and my problem with Whedon is less that, and more the fact that he has the Stephen Moffat approach to narrative, in that he ignores everything that comes before his movies. Like, all of the character build-up to Black Widow in the Captain America series. By the way, love the Captain America series. All the build-up to Black Widow's character in those movies, he just completely tossed out of the window in Age of Ultron, and as Jonin can vouch, it shows.
Yeah, that really wasn't a good move. Also, on the plus side though, I will say thankfully Whedon only has control of the Avengers movies so far, but all in all, while some people have problems with the jokey formula, I still really enjoy it. I mean, whilst I do have issues with Age of Ultron, and I wasn't that keen on Thor 2 The Dark World, at the very least, each movie, the worst they've ever been is okay. Or in the case of Thor: The Dark World, okay with some good bits in it, which is no mean feat given how many movies they've had. Like, they could have easily botched any of them, and none of the movies, whilst they've had problems, certainly, like, I still think Age of Ultron and Thor 2 are the weakest ones so far, but none of them have ever pissed me off the same way, I don't know, Man of Steel has, for example.
Yeah, and none of them have ever pissed me off as much as the Dark Knight trilogy. Yes, feel free to shit on me for that one.
Yeah, but, if I had to name some weaknesses, admittedly the first one, it's mostly, apparently, it's due to one douchey producer at Marvel who's now gotten a much lesser role, which is the reason why many actors, including Chris Hemsworth, were thinking about leaving and then suddenly deciding, well, you know what, I can stay around for some 3 more movies, sure, why not?
That bad, huh?
Yeah, but whilst Marvel has, right now, out of Civil War, gotten the racial balance right, like, as many people point out, one of the plus points of Civil War is the fact that you can have 3 black characters, all with 3 completely different personalities and points of view, to the point where 2 of them can actually argue a political situation sensibly. But at the same time, it is still kind of embarrassing that right now there are 2 women Avengers, and neither of them have had their own movies.
Yeah, and furthermore, Whedon chickified the hell out of one of them. Still not over that.
Yeah, that was kind of bad.
And might I add, the more badass of the 2, too. What the fuck is Whedon?
I know, especially since he was the one who wrote half of her badass scenes in the first movie, but anyway,
Yeah, moving on from that.
My second critique, I know it seems really weird given that it's one of the selling points, but I'd actually like them to make some movies that are a bit more standalone, because I enjoyed Civil War, but the reason why I still prefer Captain America Winter Soldier is that aside from, there are references to previous Captain America movies, and obviously there's the existence of Black Widow, but it can still work on its own as a movie. It's just, oh, you need a vague reference to see why that person's there. Civil War, it feels more like Avengers 2.5, because, yeah, Cap is kind of the main focus, but we've also dragged in Ant-Man, we've got the introduction of Spider-Man, you've got the introduction of Black Panther and his mythos, you've got the Avengers being torn apart, which, by the way, only 1 movie? Really?
Wow, that team must have been held together with paper mache and coffee.
Yeah, I guess that's what happens when you make Tony Stark one of the key members, but anyway.
It's true. I have some feelings on Iron Man, and not all of them are positive.
I think many people would be right with you, mate, but yeah, I do kind of prefer that some movies, they be kept standalone, so that the crossover aspects can be a bit more of a celebration. Like, when we get to the Avengers, it actually means something. Because I think we're slowly getting to what's happening in the comics, which is kind of crossover fatigue. Because we've had so many big events, like, we had Age of Ultron, and then in the movie that's supposed to be Cap's downtime, we've got a small-scale conflict between every single Avenger.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, kind of Avengers 2.5 right there.
I mean, there are some standalone stuff coming out. I mean, I am looking forward to Doctor Strange, because that's something completely different from the Marvel Universe. Plus, I like Benedict Cumberbatch. Yeah, go ahead, sue me.
Well, honestly, that's a contentious issue, and I'm not going to touch it with a barge pole. All I'll say in conclusion to my thoughts on the MCU is, Fox, please, for the love of God, give up the Fantastic Four so I can finally have Christoph Waltz as Doctor Doom. Or at least someone who doesn't suck!
Oh god, yes. I mean, they managed to get Spider-Man, so hope for the future, I guess?
Disney, free Fantastic Four from the clutches of Fox!
Oh yeah, one last thing I will say, because again, I am really enjoying the stuff Marvel, but if there was one weakness I'd have to give is have some better final battles, because really, a lot of the time it is just massive mob and one guy who gets taken out very quickly. Like, it says something when the biggest and most tense final battle with gripping choreography was Iron Man against Captain America, so...
Yeah, I mean, hero versus hero, that's kinda sad. To be fair, though, I hear that, I forget what the third Avengers movie's subtitle is, but the third movie, I hear, is going to feature Thanos, and that's gonna be silly.
Yeah, after all the hyping they've done over these movies, it had better match it.
And I mean, maybe it's just dumb optimism, but I'm hopeful because I loved Thanos in Guardians of the Galaxy, not least because he was played by Josh Brolin. And the reason why that appeals to me so much is, okay, you have a cosmic dictator with a laughable style of speech and a ridiculous character design voiced by a man who once portrayed George Bush.
And on that mental image...
He's actually really good, too!
Oh, I am looking forward to that now. Okay.
But, yeah, those are our slightly disjointed and very expansive thoughts on the MCU.
Indeed. Our next question comes from the Infernity Zero, and his first question is...
Your thoughts on the Pokemon Go craze?
I have not partaken, but good for Pokemon fans for finally getting out of their basements. I'm still in mine.
I would definitely be right up there with them, but the unfortunate thing is, I'm one of the few unlucky people who bought a Windows phone. So...
Oh, you poor bastard.
Yeah, so I haven't been able to get involved. Plus, from what I hear, it mostly only works in towns and cities, and I'm looking out my window and I can see two buildings. Oh, that's new.
And I'm not far off, admittedly. I'm in a town of 25,000 people in Wyoming, the actual legitimate middle of nowhere. But even I, working at my college library, have encountered no less than 12 groups of would-be Pokemon trainers having gym battles in the stacks.
Yeah, I was in a private chat with Luffy McDuck, and he said one of the most surreal sights was that one of the gyms in his local area was placed outside the tax office.
Suck that tax service.
Indeed, so, yeah, I say good on the Pokemon fans for not only keeping the craze alive, but being able to have their own fun adventures, walking up mountains and meeting new people, even if one of the first questions is, are you with Team Instinct or not?
Yeah, say what you will about Pokemon Go, but of course there has to be some sort of fandom rivalry, there always is.
Indeed, yes.
More on that whenever we get to the Bleach review, actually. But back to Pokemon Go.
Yeah, well actually, on that thought, there has been some fandom rivalry, but not just in Pokemon Go. I have seen far too many comments recently that say something along the lines of,
when you've been a fan of Pokemon for years and you're sick to death of all this bandwagon.
Dude, we were the original bandwagon. Get over it, you hipster f***.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, oh dear God, I feel so sorry for you. People who left the fandom have been inspired to come back and form your numbers and make your series in the public eye again. I am so sorry for you. Actually, no, I'm not. Ditto what Sven said.
Yeah, so, on that thought, overall, Pokemon Go, good thing. The problem is, well, my phone would die if I tried to play it, and Jonas lives in even more of the middle of nowhere than I do.
Yeah, I will also say, in the spirit of positivity, if you are a long-time Pokemon fan and you're really that worried that the people playing Pokemon Go are only doing it for bandwagon, here's an idea. Be positive. Encourage them to move on to the other games. Point out some of the cool stuff that has happened over the years. You know, actually be welcoming, because, let me be blunt, gatekeeping and insisting you're a true fan is not going to earn you any credit with anyone. Sorry.
It's true, and also, what is wrong with the idea of new people discovering Pokemon? What's wrong with that? It's more sales for us, it's more incentive for Game Freak to come up with good ideas, and, let's be honest, lack of sales nearly killed Fire Emblem. Remember that. Our next question from IZ reads,
What video game protagonist are you most attached to?
Oh, did you really have to ask me this? Jonin, take it from me while I sort through approximately 17 years of video game history.
Fair enough. I guess in my case, I have two answers. One is kind of obvious given my history on the channel, the other one not so much. The first one is, well, I have a very nostalgic connection to Donkey Kong because, you know, one of the first video game characters I ever played, also the one who kind of twitted me onto the idea of, maybe video games can tell stories. Plus, I played it a lot with my family, so, yeah, a lot of nostalgic attachment to it there. The second, and it may seem bizarre, but it makes a lot of sense, Lloyd Irving.
Of course. This will require some elaboration for the listeners, but that makes total sense to me.
Yeah, basically, Lloyd Irving, he's the protagonist of Tales of Symphonia, and the reason I have such an attachment to that game, apart from it being really good, it was one of the first big JRPGs I picked up that wasn't really connected with Nintendo in any way, and Lloyd's basic character arc is that he starts off as, well, let's be honest, a self-righteous brat, but over the course of the game, he learns that the world is more complicated, see that everyone has a different side to everything, and then eventually forms his own philosophy, to the point where, at the end of the game, he makes two declarations. He absolutely refuses to let anyone tell him that any sacrifice was for the greater good, because, as he said multiple times, no life should be born for the sole purpose of dying, and wanted to actively work to create a world where everyone can live in peace and equality, because, as he summed up during the big speech, everyone has the right to live from the moment they are born. And some people may be rolling their eyes at this saying, come on, that's the cheesiest and corniest stuff I've ever heard in my life. Why would that be the big thing to you? Again, I was a teenager when I first picked this up. It may be corny and cheesy, but sometimes you do need a blunt hammer to smack someone over the head and say, hey, this may sound obvious, but you clearly haven't been paying attention, so whack.
Yeah, also, anyone deriding that as cheesy has clearly not played Tales of Symphonia, because Lloyd was raised in the Dwarven tradition, and the Dwarven tradition is made of cheese.
Basically, yeah. To the point where even he can't stand the word justice just because people keep saying justice and love will always win.
And every time I hear that quote, all I can think of is Javash the Stampede. Love and peace!
Indeed, yes.
Now that I think of it, Vash would drive Lloyd up a tree. On that amusing mental image.
Indeed. That's kind of why I have an attachment to Lloyd, because that character growth was inspiring to me as a teenager, and it did kind of inform a large part of the philosophy I live by today, to be honest.
Yeah, and I imagine quite a bit of your shared aversion to Grimdark that you share with me.
That is true, yes. So, Sven, found an answer yet?
You could say that. I've thought of 3, actually. I'll get the first one out of the way because it's quick. I have an attachment to Link from Legend of Zelda. Because Legend of Zelda was the first proper video game I ever played. That being, Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64. The game that kind of solidified my love for the Nintendo 64 before Ogre Battle came along and won my heart forever. But, yeah, baseline attachment is to Link for just about the same reasons you have an attachment to Donkey Kong, although admittedly, Link doesn't quite have the appeal of an ape in a tie. Second character, Guybrush Threepwood from the Monkey Island series. Or as I like to call those games, my introduction to video game narrative and Discworld-style humor.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I mean, I sadly have not had much experience on the Monkey Island games, but what little I do know of them, yeah, that does explain a lot.
You fight like a dairy farmer. Oh god. To this day, I don't care how it happens, but I want to see some sort of face-off between Guybrush and Rincewind from Discworld, because they kind of fill the same narrative role. The hapless protagonist who somehow survives everything. And I'm thinking, epic rap battle of silliness.
That would be interesting, yes.
I mean, obviously it can't be a death battle, because no one would ever win.
Yeah. It would be like the opposite of the Sekita Sanshiro versus Chuck Norris.
Oh god, it's true. No one would ever win because they're too savvy to fight. And on that amazing mental image, number 3, Ike from Path of Radiance. Yes, specifically from Path of Radiance. Path of Radiance, for me, what solidified with certainty my love for Fire Emblem, and a great part of that was, honestly, Ike, for a lot of the reasons you brought up in your VGT special about him. I mean, we have a protagonist who, for the first time in the series, is not of noble birth, and is of, at long last, a relatable personality.
Yeah, that is actually a really good pick, and I guess probably a huge part of why a lot of people do hold up Path of Radiance as their favourite, and in fact I know that there is a contingent of Fire Emblem fans that desperately want more Fire Emblem games in the style of Path of Radiance, so...
Yeah, and speaking personally, I know that there is a large contingent of fans who want an HD remake of Path of Radiance, hopefully with better voice acting.
Oh god, yes.
Hint, hint, I might be one. But, yeah, for narrative and character purposes, and for the influence that game had on my love of Fire Emblem, and in fact on my writing, Ike, for me, is a solid third choice. And I specifically say Ike of Path of Radiance because somehow the writers of Radiant Dawn, for some ungodly reason, tried to turn him into the bargain version of Ichigo. More on that later.
Yes, it's probably best to move on whilst we're still positive.
Yeah, my contingent I just brought up aside, I think those 5 are a good note to end on.
Indeed, yes. Although we still have one final question, and it comes from 2 Junkie, because tradition.
Of course.
And his question is,
What name would you give to the theoretical 8th color of the rainbow?
I actually have a semi-serious answer to this question. I'm not going to provide any context or any explanation beyond one phrase. Octarine, because Terry Pratchett.
I really need to read more Discworld novels. Yeah, in my case, I'll just, I don't know, Unobtainium, let's go with that. So...
Unobtainium! Oh god! Avatar, bad memories.
Indeed. So, on that note, we will quickly say thank you to everyone who sent us the questions. Please keep them coming. They always make this opening section very interesting. But now, it is time for our main section, which is...
Reviews!
This is the section where the two of us review something we've read, watched, or played. At least that's how it normally plays out. But, here's the thing. Back when we first started this podcast, we actually had the review section split up into multiple categories. Video game, film, etc. One of those categories was manga. And that was mainly there specifically so we can cover what was known at the time as 2 of the big 3 series of manga. Naruto and Bleach.
Yeah, that quickly wore thin after Naruto swung hard into one of its infamous stupid phases, and Bleach just swung permanently into stupid.
Yeah, both of them started going downhill, and that plus some copyright strikes over me using the images, it kind of got dull. But at the same time, the Naruto manga ran its course, and we did a big review of the podcast that not only summed up the final chapter, but also our final thoughts of the series. And Bleach has kind of done the same recently. It's run its course and reached the final chapter, so we are definitely going to do the same here because it's only fair. The only slight hiccup is that it didn't really end gracefully. In fact, we went into the final arc and then suddenly Kubo, despite boasting that he could make the final arc go on for years, was suddenly told that he only had 2 months to wrap up the entire series, and so the ending was a bit rushed and nonsensical because of it.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten into the review yet, and I'm just going to declare Naruto the premature winner of the ending game.
Yes, although this is, of course, assuming that One Piece never ends.
Fair assumption.
Yeah, surprisingly, Bleach has definitely been the less successful of the big three because Naruto had some silly points, but it still ended with a strong ending, got a sequel series, a spin-off anime/manga gag series, and is still going ahead with the video game route. One Piece is a bit exhausting because even after God knows how many decades, they've only just explained how we can reach the end game, but even then we still have to get through major arcs, like there's going to be the entire arc focused on Sanji this year.
Oh god. What's the over-under on whether or not One Piece reaches 30 years before they ever find One Piece?
Pretty high, considering that whilst admittedly I'm kind of off and on One Piece as to whether I think it's good or not, I will say I have full respect for Oda because, yeah, it might be a bit exhausting, but it's managed to keep the same level of quality and keeps delivering awesome moment after awesome moment to the fans, so yeah, big plus points there.
And I mean, I've taken the mickey out of One Piece a time and time again, but taking your word on that, that's impressive, because Shonen is very easy to f*** up.
Yeah, and Bleach, well, it's had a less graceful run. Like, we mentioned that it was part of the big three. Like, it used to be one of Shonen Jump's 3 main mascots. You would have Naruto, Luffy, and Ichigo consistently on the front covers. Now, Toriko has more or less fitted that role, and he's also getting edged out by Deku from My Hero Academia, so yeah, Bleach has been kind of losing popularity, and on top of that, even if you just compare the anime runs, the One Piece and Naruto anime are still going. Like, Naruto anime hasn't even reached the end yet. I think they've only just reached the Kaguya battle at the moment.
Yeah, that's the thing, and of course One Piece is still going because there's no end in sight. But Bleach got cancelled. And honestly, after the chapter that Kubo released on Thursday, I think the anime ended on a better note.
Yeah, because it basically got cancelled before the final arc started, so they had to end the series on what was supposed to be the transitional arc in the manga, but yeah, I'm starting to agree with Sven. It's possible that this might have been a better ending. It gets even worse. In terms of rankings, Naruto had high and low points, but it always remained in the top 5 years before it finished. By contrast, Bleach went from one of the most highest ranking series all the way to number 15. And if that wasn't enough, its finale got 1 color page and no fanfare or acknowledgement on the cover. Which would be sad on its own, but what's even sadder is that a few weeks earlier, Nisekoi, a romantic comedy, which has only run for about 5 years, had an entire cover dedicated to its finale. This is how badly the series has fallen in terms of popularity, folks. Yeah, we're kind of leaving people in the dark here, so if you've only just recently joined our show, or you've skipped all the sections because you have never been interested in Bleach, I'm going to give a brief recap of both the premise and what happened over the first couple of arcs to bring everyone up to speed. Okay, Bleach is the story of a young protagonist named Ichigo, who also has orange hair. I only bring that up because many people speculate that the reason he has orange hair, keep in mind that this is a rarity in Japan, is part of the reason why the series is called Bleach. Otherwise, no one has any idea.
Get used to that, folks, because that is tell number 1 of Kubo's obscurity.
Yeah. So, our protagonist is Ichigo Kurosaki. He can see ghosts, but he's surprisingly cool at that. He's always had the ability to see spirits, but he gets on with his regular everyday life, which seems to consist of going to high school, getting into fights with street gangs, and then getting into literal fights with his dad.
We're not joking here, by the way. That's a running gag that, to this day, I haven't been quite able to wrap my head around beyond it just being Kubo's also infamous idea of comedy.
But one night, he is suddenly visited in his room, unintentionally, by a woman in a black kimono wielding a sword called Rukia Ichiki. After getting over the initial shock of, "Oh my god, you can actually see me!" Rukia explains that she is a Soul Reaper. Basically, swordsmen who chase after evil spirits known as Hollow. When I say evil, basically Hollow are spirits of people who refuse to let go of their last regrets and got turned into these monsters who now prey on the souls of the living.
Basically, they're poltergeists with a superiority complex.
Whilst Rukia is explaining this, a Hollow starts attacking Ichigo and his family, and Rukia tries to defend them but gets injured. Ichigo desperately asks, is there a way to fight the Hollow? And Rukia decides to give him half of her power so that Ichigo, even though he's alive, can briefly become a Soul Reaper and take on the Hollow. The only problem is something strange happens, and instead of getting half her power, Ichigo gets all of it.
Yeah, awkward, and believe me, it sets the stage for plenty of getting all the power.
Yeah, we'll get onto that later, but because she's lost her powers, Rukia is essentially stuck in the living world for a time and has to borrow a fake body so that she can attend Ichigo's school. And by the way, I will give Bleach a lot of flack, but I will say a joke I still laugh at to this day is Rukia arrives at school, Ichigo is freaking out, and Rukia decides to play cool and goes, "Oh, hello, I've heard all about you. Are you Ichigo? My name is Rukia." Opens up her hand to shake it, and she has a message written on it which says, "Make a scene and you are dead."
Yeah, I'll give Kubo credit. His humor was actually a bit more on point at the start of the series. In fact, a lot of Bleach was more on point at the start of the series.
Yeah, we are going to give Bleach a lot of flack, but it should be noted that there were a lot of good qualities in the first 2 arcs that actually kept us around for that point, and we'll cover those as we go. So, whilst Rukia is basically trapped and powerless, she recruits Ichigo as a substitute Soul Reaper to take out the Hollows in her place.
And let me just say, Ichigo gets way more hours of employment as a substitute than I do working for the county library system.
Aww. But, yeah, this sets up the first year of the manga's publication, and the first, I forget how many episodes there were offhand, but basically the first arc of the anime, which are essentially a collection of Monster of the Week stories. They fall into this pattern of, there is a Hollow running around with unique abilities, Ichigo fights them and finds a way to defeat them. Its main purpose is to do 2 things. One, establish the connection between Ichigo and Rukia, which starts off as this kind of reluctant master and student, but then eventually grows into this kind of... how would you describe it? Camaraderie?
I think that's the best word for it. Like, obviously the relationship develops as the series goes on, but eventually a mutual respect develops, let's say.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. And over the course of that, we are introduced to several other protagonists in a compelling way. Orihime, Ishida, and Chad, who over time also develop their own strange and unique spirit powers. Orihime can heal and create shields. Chad, I don't know what to describe it, armed gauntlets that allow him to punch things.
Yeah, basically Chad gets the power of spirit boxing.
Indeed, and Ishida, well, he's already had the powers before, but he is essentially a Quincy, which is another form of spirit fighting that allows him to create energy bows. And we essentially established this cast and their basic personalities, and then the Soul Society arc happens. The premise is that, as it turns out, making substitute Soul Reapers is something that Rukia did on the spur of the moment and is technically illegal. So, 2 other Soul Reapers come down and, keep in mind that in the manga, this is about after a year of publication, they come down, kick the ever-loving crap out of Ichigo, and then take Rukia back with them. And Rukia seemingly goes willingly with them, telling Ichigo that she doesn't want to be rescued and to go away. But Ichigo, even though he's a mouthy thug with a bit of an attitude, he is still a good person at heart who wants to look out for everyone, and he thinks himself he can't let it end like this. Rukia was clearly unhappy with the whole thing, so he wants to find a way to repay her. So him and the others find a way to break into the Soul Society with some help of some other stranded Soul Reapers, namely one guy named Urahara.
And may I just say, Urahara, one of the high points of the series, at least until this disaster of the final arc.
Yeah, Urahara, former Soul Reaper and enigmatic scientist, finds a way for them to get into the Soul Society, and from here on out, the arc has 2 plots running through it. The first is Ichigo and his friends trying to break through the Soul Society defenses in order to rescue Rukia. The other one being the captains of the Soul Society trying to solve a conspiracy plot because 1 or 2 of the members have suddenly started thinking to themselves, okay, wait a minute, yeah, the whole substitute Soul Reaper thing is illegal, but Rukia's been sentenced with execution. That's a bit extreme.
Yeah, there's some weird things going on here, and for once in life, it isn't just the resident government of the Soul Society just being assholes.
Yeah, although they are still assholes, just make it clear.
Yeah, let's just say that in this arc, the Soul Reapers are not exactly portrayed in the best of lights.
Yeah. But having said all that, this arc is when a lot of people really got invested in Bleach, because this is when the series went from, okay, this is kind of cool, to, oh my god, I have to see the next part, because the Soul Society arc is when, well, a lot of things happen. First off, we get introduced to the Soul Society captains, aka some of the most popular characters in the entirety of Bleach.
Yeah, basically the rest of the starring cast that you see in Bleach popularity polls. Also the first round of excuses for Kubo to utilize his love of character design.
Yeah, again, more on this later, but it's also one of the more compelling arcs because we're introduced to all of these new characters who have these personal ties to each other, their own goals that are written in a compelling way, and of course, Ichigo is trying everything he can to rescue Rukia because, well, as he mentions, Rukia gave him the power to protect people and he feels like he has an enormous debt. Also, this is when the action really picks up, and it's here we are introduced to 2 main mechanics, which I'm going to explain now because it's going to make a lot more sense for what we talk about later. First is the revelation that the Sun Pakuto, aka the Soul Reaper's sword, is in fact a spirit in and of itself. It has a personality and an avatar for that power, and if you bond with it, you develop what's known as a Sekai, or Third Seal, which is basically a super move or unique ability that only that sword can do. So, Ichigo develops what is known as Getsuga Tensho. It's something like Heaven Piercing Fan. I don't think there was ever an official English translation, which is kind of a shame, but basically it means Ichigo can fire energy beams out of his sword.
Get used to that because it's the only power he uses in the entire series. I wish I was joking.
Yeah, and it's kind of underwhelming considering that other examples of Sekais include turning your blade into thousands of sharp cherry blossoms, a sword that can extend its range, in fact there are multiple variations of that, a sword that can drain someone's life force if it cuts you, a sword that can turn to ash, a sword that can make things heavy if you cut them, a sword that can slice through dimensions.
Again, we're not joking on that last one, and that's not even getting into the elemental powers, aka my favorite form of magic in fiction.
Indeed, like the ice-cold Hitsugaya, the child Shikigami captain, who, for some reason, is one of the most popular ones in Japan. Don't know why.
Yeah, I've yet to wrap my head around that one. And for some reason, also one of the most hated in America, and I'll admit that he gets maybe all too much screen time. Not nearly as much as Ichigo, but he gets all too much screen time, but I wouldn't quite go that far.
Yeah. And actually, I think the only other person who has a less impressive power than Ichigo is Ikkaku, but that's because his power is, my sword turns into a 3-section staff!
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, to be fair, Ikkaku is a member of the 11th Division, and they're not known for their creativity. They're known for punching things. Or, in this case, just murdering things.
That is true. It's also where we're introduced to Kenpachi, who... he's basically a walking tank.
Yeah, and he only gets sillier as the series goes on. Although, one of the more memorable characters in Bleach, and one of the more charming.
Indeed, yes. The other mechanic that we're introduced to is the level beyond that, because once you've really, really bonded and become best mates forever with the avatar of your Sanpakuto, you develop Bankai, aka Super Forms.
And once again, Ichigo gets the short end of the stick and somehow runs with it for the rest of the series, because all he gets is super speed and a better laser beam.
True, but it did make for a visually impressive fight with Byakuya, the person who kicked his ass the first time, and I've gotta say, that is definitely one of my favourite battles in Bleach, just because it is the perfect grudge match, and it's the classic shonen trope of, we have a guy who comes along, kicks the ever-loving crap out of the hero, is condescending to him through multiple fights, but then each time the hero meets him, he keeps growing in strength until finally he can stand toe-to-toe with him for one big, epic clash.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Ichigo, despite being the protagonist, has one of the most boring Zanpakuto there ever was, but even with that, he gives us our money's worth in the final battle of the Soul Society arc.
Indeed. Unfortunately, this is not where the series ends, because I mentioned before that there was a conspiracy plot. Enter Aizen, who is introduced as this kind, warm-hearted intellectual who seems to be murdered halfway through the arc, but it turns out that was him faking his own death so he could move behind the scenes, and I'm not going to get into the exact details of his plan, partially so that you can watch the series for yourself, but also because it's insane. But,
yeah, he has more or less a plan to take over every reality, and as it turns out, he's a stone-cold psychopath.
Basically, yeah, and part of his plan is to combine Soul Reaper powers with Hollow powers, but how it connects to Rukia, it would take far too long to explain, but long story short, at the very end, he makes his grand declaration, and in one of the few times Aizen did something that was overpowered but looked cool, Ichigo tries to take him out of his Bankai. Aizen stops him with 2 fingers.
Yeah, that happens, and suddenly we're given a very good vision of the power gap in this series.
Indeed, and especially since not only does Aizen stop him with 2 fingers, somehow Ichigo then explodes in shards of blood afterwards.
Yeah, again, still trying to explain that one a decade later, but admittedly still kind of an impressive scene.
Indeed, and the last thing we see of Aizen in this arc is him and his henchmen rising up into this dimensional rift saying, "Farewell, Soul Reapers."
Treasure that, because not only is it the only time Aizen was ever a fully effective antagonist, it's also one of the last times Bleach was ever cool without strings attached.
Yeah, because this leads us into the second arc, which we were all pumped for, because it obviously established that Aizen was going to be the next villain, and yeah, it was kind of slow to get going at first. We had to introduce the new batch of villains, because part of Aizen's experiments was creating a Ranka, aka humanoid hollows who can use swords similar to what the Soul Reapers can do. So this kind of sets what's basically going to be the running formula for every arc up to this point is villain comes along with a superpowered crew, has some overly complicated plan, but will eventually lead to the 2 armies fighting it out. Except in the case of Aizen, they decided to go with a slightly different route, namely a retread of what happened in the Soul Society arc. Eventually, Aizen kidnaps Ichigo's friend, Orihime, because as it turns out, her healing power is not quite straight-up healing. In fact, it's essentially her placing an energy field over the wound and say, I reject the reality that caused that wound.
Yeah, so in this, we fall back on the time-honored shonen tradition of reality warping. Hi, Griffith.
Indeed, yes. So, Aizen decides to kidnap Orihime so that he can use her power for himself. Ichigo and a group of friends then break into Aizen's stronghold in order to rescue Orihime, and of course he also has to fight against two of the Hollows who have fought him through close matches before. You can see where it's getting repetitive, but again, we didn't mind because Aizen had established himself as an effective protagonist, and hey, the Soul Society arc was good, why could this arc not be good as well?
Well, for starters, this is where Bleach developed its, legendary issue with timing. This arc started, I believe, in 2004. It concluded in 2011. And over the course of those 7 years, 1 day passed in universe. Sorry, Kubo, I'm calling bullshit.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And the sad thing is, the Hueco Mundo saga had a lot of potential, and it was a mixed bag for me because I liked a lot of what Kubo did, but when he did something wrong in it, oh god, he really did it wrong. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, I'm only going to bring it up once because I have a feeling that I could rant on for hours about this, trying to make Mayuri Kuretsuchi sympathetic.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Mayuri Kuretsuchi is... Imagine if you made the Joker a scientist. Now imagine if you tried to make him a hero.
That is the most absurdly accurate summary of his character I've ever heard. Basically, he is quite possibly the least sympathetic Soul Reaper there ever has been and ever will be, and Kubo tries to play him off as comedic relief, after establishing him as Uryu's rival.
Indeed. Well, not just a rival, as establishing him as the guy who's responsible for wiping out most, if not all, of the Quincy's.
We'll get more into that later, because that plot point plays a huge part in the final arc. And it never gets any elaboration. That's just one indication of the problems that started plaguing Bleach around this time. Kubo would occasionally do awesome things, but whenever he failed Bleach, oh god, he failed Bleach hard.
Indeed, and I should also mention as a character, because I'm sure some people are thinking, well, that actually sounds kind of cool if he goes on some kind of redemption for what he's done. Oh, no. He doesn't actually go on any redemption. His character doesn't change in any way. He's still the psychopath. It's just that for some reason Kubo thinks it's funny now.
Get a stunning example of Kubo and logic.
Like Sven said, this is when Kubo's writing style started to hit the floor, especially since after Ichigo defeated Grimmjow, several things happened, which leads into 4 of my biggest issues with Bleach. The first, arcs going nowhere because Kubo just suddenly changes his mind about things, or he tries to deliver a plot twist, but he's not good at building anything up. See, after they defeat Grimmjow, Aizen suddenly appears in, well, I don't know, Spirit Skype, I don't know what it's called, but Aizen appears and says, "Hi everyone. Remember when I said that my main goal was to kidnap Orihime in order to use her reality warping powers? They're very impressive, aren't they? I mean, she managed to revive someone from the dead, for goodness sake, even after they were completely disintegrated. That is an impressive feat that could basically rewrite the entire laws of this universe. But, as it turns out, no, I was using her as a bait. I'm actually invading your hometown now. Bye!"
Yeah, we should probably elaborate that before this point, Aizen was established as a tactical genius, and this is where that starts to fall apart really badly.
Yeah, apparently he wanted to get rid of a handful of Soul Reapers. Not all of them, just a handful of them. I mean, big heavy hitters are still there, for crying out loud.
Yeah, including the General of the Soul Society, or as the fandom calls him, Captain Broken.
this is something that's going to happen regularly throughout Bleach. You will have this establishment of, oh yeah, this is exactly who this character is, this is everything they are, and then out of nowhere, Kubo will just reveal, actually, no, forget that, this is what happened.
Yeah, like, occasionally Kishimoto would do something ridiculous like that with Naruto. Oh my god, Black Zetsu. But Kubo makes it an art form.
Yeah, like, this is how bad it gets. I swear, Chad has at least 3 different origin stories for his powers. It's not even funny.
I know, right?
Yeah, like the first one, it was something along the lines of, well, he's been around Ichigo. Ichigo has a large amount of spiritual pressure, so he gained the abilities. Then it was Aizen claiming that it was all part of his master plan because, by hanging around with Rukia and this special MacGuffin he's getting, their wishes were granted. And then the third time it claims, it's because I'm a full-breeder, aka someone who gained X-Men-like abilities because my parents were attacked by a hollow.
So not only does that third origin story make no sense, it also makes Aizen look like a moron.
Yeah, because that second origin, he claims that I was the one behind your conception, Ichigo, but he makes no indication of how exactly giving Ichigo powers would help him in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, if he's a tactical genius, he can obviously see that Ichigo is the broken-ass protagonist, so empowering that is counterintuitive to everything at best.
Yeah. Then we get to my second big problem with Bleach, around the time Ichigo fights Ulquiorra. I mentioned before the idea of Sekais and Bankais, and at first the battles were kind of cool, because each character has their established abilities and move pool, and honestly, my favourite shonen stories are the ones where that's kept consistent, and so the characters have to think, okay, how do I use my ability to get around his ability? Because it becomes an interesting clash of fighting styles, and they have to think creatively on their feet, and sometimes some of the coolest moments have been when characters have used previously established abilities in creative ways. It's one of the reasons why I freaking love Buso Renkin as a series, and Rurouni Kenshin, kind of think of it.
And the first few arcs of Naruto, because, as we've established at some point on this show, I don't remember exactly when, one of the draws of Naruto in the first place was the tactical fights. Admittedly, that got thrown to the wayside in favor of the Bleach approach, which is bashing powers together until someone falls over, but the point remains.
Yeah, although I would more compare that to Dragon Ball Z, because Bleach, Bleach, it started on that, but then every single battle became, who can pull the biggest hammer out of their ass first? Like, every single fight, it came to characters just pulling either a new form or a new move out of nowhere. Literally out of nowhere. Like, a character who hadn't fought yet would reveal, this is my Sekai, and surprisingly, it is exactly what we need in this situation. Or if a character did have an established moveset, they would have to come up with some complete BS. Some of my personal favourite examples include, my sword was pissed off because it kept breaking. I deliberately give my sword a cute nickname, and it first cuts its power in half because it's sulking. And to top it off, one that happens with Itsugaya, these powers aren't the time limit to my Bankai, they're the time limit until I turn into a teenager, which I apparently hate for some reason.
To quote a Carl Sagan meme, my brain is full of billions and billions of
And this also leads into something I'm pretty sure we've ranted about a couple of times on the show. It's the irritatingly dumb solution to Ichigo versus Ulquiorra. If the Hakamundo arc was essentially a retread of the Soul Society arc, this was the Ichigo versus Byakuya. The big battle between someone who had kicked Ichigo's ass before, and in one of the last few impressive moments of Bleach, again, a great moment that demonstrated the power gap, Ulquiorra, when he's kicking the ass of Ichigo, asks him, why are you still fighting even though it looks like you can't win? Ichigo says, well, it's simple, you're the top of Sparta. If I can defeat you, we've won. Okiura grabs Ichigo's blades, cuts off a part of his kimono, and reveals a tattoo that shows that Okiura is in fact only the 4th top guy. There are 3 people above him who are even stronger.
Yeah! And as you've hinted, that fight ends in a complete curb stomp, leading us into the second clash, or as I like to call it, bull personified.
Yeah, I've been talking for a while, and I know that Sven especially hates this moment, so I'm passing the mic over.
Okay, so I should probably elaborate something here. I, for one, loved the Espada as villains, because, I don't know if it was design, or personality, or what it was, but I liked them so much more as a villain team than I did the Soul Reapers, mostly because it became eventually clear that the Soul Reapers were not exactly villains, just kind of assholes. And Ulquiorra was my favorite of all of them. Just this stoic stone wall, who, like Aizen, is something of a tactical genius, and who, frankly, has actually a very interesting, interaction arc with his captive. And, yeah, to me, he was just an amazingly interesting antagonist, and a very credible threat. And in this final battle, it starts off going just about the same way as his first clash with Ichigo. He releases his Zanpakuto twice, which I admit is a little bit of an asshole, suddenly giving a Ronkara Bankai, but it's previously unexplored territory, so I'll let it pass. He completely demolishes Ichigo, and in the end, functionally kills him. Leading to what I like to call the watershed moment of Bleach power-up bullshit. Basically, when all hope seems to be lost, Ichigo out of nowhere, for reasons that are never explained and never alluded to again, comes back from the dead as a Vasto Lord level Hollow and utterly demolishes an antagonist who until this point has been unstoppable. Like, no contest. No contest at all.
Yeah, it was such a moment, and some people are trying to defend it by saying it ties into a character arc, but it was still badly executed. Ichigo has shown signs of being able to transform into a hollow, but this is way beyond anything. Like, never to this level of power, for God's sake.
Yeah, and I feel the need to draw attention to the fact that it is never brought up again. Ever. Except in the form of a slight change to his visored mask. I'm sorry, I'm calling shenanigans on this one. We've alluded to this before, but Jonin and I are writers. We know narrative. This is the antithesis of narrative, and also something with which we are intimately familiar because we pulled similar out-of-nowhere power-up crap when we were respectively 13 and 19, and Kubo, for some reason, tries to pass it off as legitimate storytelling.
Yeah, it would be bad enough, like, it was supposed to be part of an arc that Ichigo claims that, oh, this wasn't the way I wanted to win, and it's supposed to be giving himself doubts, but funnily enough, he kind of loses that self-doubt within the next couple of fights.
Yeah, like, over the course of literally hours, because again, this arc for some ungodly reason takes place over the course of a day. He ends the fight, wins, moves on, and strap yourselves in, folks, because the power-ups only get more ridiculous from here.
Yeah, basically, from this point on, the fights became really unsatisfying because occasionally you would find something creative or you might enjoy it because it involves your favorite character, but very rarely did the fights rely on any kind of creativity. I think the last one was Brannigan. That was the last fight that required any kind of creativity or cunning from the hero's part, and even then the fans don't like it for whatever reason. The rest, all blind luck.
Yeah, again, going back to what made the Espada so interesting was that their fights, with the exception of the bullshit that was Ulquiorra's last stand, their fights were more or less the last time clashes in Bleach made any sort of cohesive tactical sense.
Indeed. But this then leads on to my third problem, which is there were too many characters. Like, we mentioned before that you have Ichigo's cool friends, which form a cast of 5. Obviously, this is if you include Rukia as part of that bunch. Then you have the Soul Reaper captains, and there are 13 of those. Then you have their lieutenants, and sometimes you have their supporting seats as well. And part of the reason why this arc took so long is because for some reason Tite Kubo, the author, came up with the idea that, oh, I'll give every single one of them focus. Not just one panel, entire fights. Yeah, we thought it was kind of cool because they were giving lip service to some of our favourite characters, but in hindsight it dragged the series on for no good reason because we had to see every single red shirt fight, every single blue shirt fight, every single minor character who's appeared once. We had to see their ability, had to see them go up against some no-name Narankar no one cared about in the first place, even though the main villains of the arc are literally standing above them in the sky.
Yeah! And that's not even getting into the fact that the clashes with the Espada were taking place 3 feet away.
Yeah, and this is admittedly skipping ahead, but it does kind of relate to something that happens in both this arc and the last. The last arc suffers the same problem in that there are way too many characters, all of them need to appear in the spotlight in some way to take down the main villains of that organization. And Kubo was forced to cancel it, so he had to go while the main villain's taking back his power from the minions, so it kills them instantly, interrupting the fight. I've suddenly noticed that, yeah, that move was very clearly and obviously something that was rushed, but I begin to suspect this is not the first time this has happened, because what was the one moment that stood out like a sore thumb during the whole fight in Karakura Town? Aizen killing off Haribel, the third strongest Vizard, for no reason. Sorry, Arankar. The names kind of blow into one after a while. I suspect it's because someone in Shonen Jump said to Kubo, okay, look, seriously, you need to speed this up. This is getting ridiculous now.
Yeah, and what's sad is, this all could have been avoided if he had these fights going on in the background and focused on the damned Espada.
Yeah, considering they're the captains of the main enemy force, they should be the main focus. But no, instead, we had to drag it out. And this is something that happens. I don't know whether it's because he wanted to give all the small characters spotlight, or whether it was because Kubo just really, really wanted the series to last as long as it could. But yeah, it just got ridiculous after a time.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to what I said about the Hueco Mundo saga. It had a lot of potential, and a lot of the potential was in the, I guess, character force and potential behind the Espada. And instead of getting any focus on them, Kubo spent the entirety of the Karakura Town arc focusing on their subordinates fighting Soul Reapers we don't care about.
Yeah. So this then leads into my fourth point, which is that even if you somehow manage to endure this, the finales are never satisfied, for 2 main reasons. The first is that basically Kubo has this bad habit of overhyping his villains, because after all the Espada and the Arankar are finally defeated, Aizen steps into the ring. And we've already mentioned that Kubo has a problem with needing to give the character spotlight, so he basically makes it that Aizen is hideously broken. It would be one thing if Aizen just knocked them all off panel, but no, we had to see a detailed breakdown of every single possible character Aizen could face up to that moment.
Yeah, all getting demolished in 2 hits maximum. And this is before he pulls the MacGuffin out of his ass.
Yeah, because at first he starts using tactical genius and hypnosis shenanigans. Yeah, I should mention that his Sekai allows him to hypnotize people, hence why he was able to use the conspiracy. But he suddenly starts using the MacGuffin known as the Hyugoku, which, even by his own admission, means he doesn't have to rely on tactics anymore and can just literally walk through all of the most powerful members of the cast. When you set up someone that's stupidly powerful, nothing you do is ever gonna be that satisfying. And it happened again with the final arc, where the villain of that arc, Yhwach, his power is literally, I can see all possible futures and then decide which one happens.
Yeah, that's even more ridiculous than Doctor Doom, who predicts all possible futures.
And each and every time, it always comes down to the protagonist, Ichigo, to save the day. And obviously, that is never satisfying because, like I said, it's so ridiculous no one, especially not the main protagonist, who has admittedly a good amount of spiritual power, but a lot less training than all of the other Soul Society captains. It also doesn't help that it's kind of hard to root for Ichigo anyway, because there's really not much to him. I mean, I desperately try to think of, okay, what is Ichigo's personality here? What is his selling point? It's because when he originally started, he had a chip on his shoulder, but he was more kind of the cool teen protagonist. Like, he was like a teenager, he had a bit of an anti-problem, got into fights, but he had a good heart, and his main gimmick was that he was the straight man in a world that is, frankly, crazy. But then it kind of got to the point where, well, let's face it, when you're the straight man, and the situation is so serious that there's no room for humor and everyone is the straight man, you essentially have nothing else to fall back on.
Yeah, and that's not the biggest problem with Ichigo literally winning everything there ever was, but it's a massive part of it nonetheless, because we have this borderline unstoppable protagonist who is more of a blank gray slate than Superman, and and it is just really difficult to hype yourself up for the antagonist being taken down by someone so boring.
Indeed, and especially since, well, it's not like Ichigo has very creative powers anyway. All he has is super speed and energy beams. So, they often have to pull something major out of their arse, and a lot of the time it doesn't make sense and really should not be as powerful. Like, he defeats Aizen by going into this deep training because, as it turns out, everyone in Ichigo's family is able to perform what is known as the final Getsuga Tensho, which means that Ichigo gained for a few hours before supposedly losing his Soul Reaper powers forever. He gets them back, that's the whole point of the full Brit arc, but...
Of course.
But during this few hours that he gains the final Getsuga Tensho powers, he can literally stand toe-to-toe and overpower someone who is borderline demigod.
Yeah, like, Aizen's final Hokyoku form is almost the dictionary definition of absurdity, and the guy would not be out of place in a Scion campaign, and Ichigo completely demolishes him. Hello, Ulquiorra, my old friend.
Demolishes him after taking some meditation.
Yeah, and a training arc in the middle of the final battle. I will never let that go, because that was dumb.
Yeah, frankly, because it's meditation, it stops time, so Ichigo can then fight the avatar of his powers, and then I reread it, and as it turns out, all Ichigo, he doesn't even learn anything from it. It's just, you should stop hesitating about the hollow. Also, if you let me stab you, you accept my powers.
We haven't seen this happen before.
And then it's even less satisfying in the case of the final arc, because, as we revealed, Yhwach's power is to see every single future and decide which one happens, and it was already rushed to a ridiculous degree because, again, imminent cancellation. But it made no sense. I mean, it started creatively because Aizen decides to help out in that fight, and he uses his hypnotic illusion to make it so that he can't see which future is happening. Then Ishida, who has been flip-flopping, because I should mention that the final opponents in the final arc are essentially a bunch of Quincy's, and Ishida has basically been trying to decide whether or not he's going to join them, And then it turns out that he hasn't joined them, he just wanted to gain their power boost, and it...
Help me, villains, I want your power MacGuffins.
Indeed, and it actually, I will say, I absolutely loved the moment when Ishida's plan was discovered by the villains, because one of Yuhabak's subordinates can also see the future, and Ishida tries various attempts to outsmart him. Go ahead, Ichigo, you take on Yuhabak, I will take on his subordinate. Wait, why aren't you going after Ichigo? My whole point of staying here was to distract you. As I told you, I can see the future. I know it's not going to work.
This happens, no joke, like 7 chapters in a row, too.
Like, Ishida cannot grasp the fact that this guy can see the future, so maybe he knows what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I swear it was like a Shonen Monty Python skit.
But yeah, Ishida finally manages to get unlucky and uses special silver arrow. It would take too long to explain, but basically disables Yuhabak's power for a short amount of time, and Ichigo, his new sword suddenly breaks, which then reverts back to the old one, which allows him to cut his head off.
It makes as much sense as it sounds, which is fitting, because it even sounds like it makes no sense.
Yeah, and that confusing method is how Ichigo defeats the final villain, aka the greatest power the Bleach series has ever known, without even trying. Like, he defeats him with his old sword. Not even his Bankai sword, his regular, basic Sekai sword.
Yeah, and thus the conflict in Bleach ends as it began, a completely underwhelming joke.
Yeah, and whilst we could go into more detail about what happens over the individual arcs, those 4 problems for me are essentially what happens with Bleach. It just became one bad storytelling trope after another, and Kubo never recovered. He just kept repeating the same mistakes over and over and over. Like, yeah, you could laugh at how idiotic some of the individual moments were, but it all boiled down to everything we brought up.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Kubo tripped during the fight with Ulquiorra, and the rest of the series was just his mouth falling down the stairs.
Yeah, it's just... trying to get that gruesome image out of my head, but yeah. It just became a depressing mess. Like, this is completely different from Naruto, because Naruto, it went into the direction that we weren't happy with, but it was still an okay series on its own. The reason we were pissed off was because it focused so much on a character that was frankly unlikable and was starting to rely on shonen cliches about my power is over 9,000, etc. But
yeah, it's one thing if a series occasionally dips into that nonsense, it's another if it completely lives and breathes it.
I only ever kept reading Bleach as a guilty pleasure, but even then, even though I had missed most of the final arc, I just came back around the fight with Asna Naklavar, which also introduced one of the most ridiculous form pulling out of its arse, i.e., oh, remember this badass ninja-esque character? Well, using this special piece of paper, we can turn her into an electrified cat girl.
Oh, God. I'll get into this later, but in my personal canon, that never happened. Ever.
Honestly, though, this is the thing. It is always really sad when a series is cancelled and the author is given no time to write a conclusion. Whilst the ending to Busa Ranking was okay, I still mourn the fact that Watsuki wasn't able to do everything he wanted. And Gunblade West, whilst it wasn't as good of a series, you could clearly tell from the final chapter that there were so many stories he had to leave by the wayside and just rush up because, again, cancellation was imminent. So, yeah, after what has been a decade or so of manga chapters, it is kind of depressing to see that Bleach ends in this ridiculously rushed way, but after seeing the balance of the final arc, part of me is actually kind of glad that it got the axe this quickly.
I'm just glad it's finally done puttering along, because I don't know how much longer I could have taken it.
Yeah, so I suppose we should cover the ending chapter since we haven't really explained how Bleach ended as such. Ichigo and the others managed to, in an incredibly rushed way, defeat the Quincy army, who, by the way, are also Nazi-themed, because why not?
Again, Kubo and questionable design and characterization choices. I mean, I had my suspicions once he literally named a chapter after a swastika.
Indeed. But after this, we literally cut to 10 years later, and we get 2 chapters. The first is basically wrapping up everything with the Soul Society captains, revealing that Rukia is now the captain of the 13th squad, which would have been awesome if she had done anything that arc.
Admittedly so, it would have been great if we had, character development and build-up leading into this, but never mind.
Yeah, it's rushed, what can you do? I'm sure Rukia had something important that she would have done.
It's Kubo.
Yeah, maybe I was being too optimistic there. But that happened in the first chapter, and the rest of the time... Dear God, that was all that happened. The rest of it was devoted to bad jokes about Kenpachi getting lost, and one of the minor characters claiming they've mastered Bankai, but no one gives a toss. So after the stuff in Soul Society happens, we then cut back to the real world, and the long and short of it is, everyone in the real world got married and had babies.
Yeah, the final chapter, to me, was literally just Kubo thinking to himself, okay, what better way to end this than to take everything Naruto did and do it 1,000 times worse?
Oh god, yes. So...
I'm gonna go off on a brief tangent here because this was a beef of mine years ago, but for some ungodly reason, despite the fact that the very existence of this romantic couple robbed Orihime of any agency whatsoever, he decided to canonize Ichigo and Orihime as an item, thus making a reality arguably the romantic personification of syphilis. And thus proving that we can, in fact, find a love story worse than Twilight.
Yeah, it's kind of weird how, despite the fact that Ichigo has... Well, he's wanted to rescue Orihime as a friend, but he's never shown any romantic inclination towards her. They apparently have a son.
In fact, I find it really ridiculous that Kubo ended off on romance anyway, because Ichigo has never shown any romantic inclination toward anybody. And furthermore, Kubo actually said himself years ago that he wasn't a fan of romance in shonen manga, and yet, for some reason, he turned his head around on that and decided to give us bargain Naruto.
It's really weird as well because, okay, it's not the exact pairing that I find weird because, in hindsight, thinking about it, whilst Rukia and Ichigo would make more sense character-wise, Rukia's a ghost, so it would be kind of awkward in a metaphysical sense, but,
I don't even want to know how that would work.
So, it's not that we have a problem with the pairing, it's more of a problem with the fact that, yeah, Ichigo has not shown any kind of affection or romantic inclination to Orihime, and the only things Orihime's shown is being dangerously clingy, but...
Yeah, this draws a perfect parallel, actually, with Naruto and Hinata, because Naruto was a dullard, but eventually recognized Hinata's affections for him, and reciprocated them. They became an item, and in the process, no one lost agency. With the case of Bleach, Orihime was obsessed with Ichigo, and more or less became a blithering idiot around him.
Yeah, this was another big problem that happened in the Okiura versus Bleach fight. You know, past me meant to say Okiura versus Ichigo, but I guess that matchup is appropriate given his crappy exit. Ichigo, though, is there. He has a hole in his chest and is effectively dead, and despite the fact that she discovered that she can use her powers to resurrect the dead, she just sits there going, what do I do, 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 what do I do? I'm not kidding! There is literally a panel which is just her clutching her head with what do I do next to her.
So basically she briefly turned into the Black Knight after his body was teleported into a field.
Yeah.
Oh god, I needed to inject some levity into this.
Yeah, it's just... It was so weird, although, speaking of levity, the ending they decide to reveal is that, well, It's twofold. One, revealing that Ichigo's son is just as overpowered because he manages to wink the last few remnants of Yhwach's power out of existence by just touching it.
We're not kidding.
And then, whilst he's wandering around in his bedroom, Rukia and Renji's child shows up and says, "Hello there, I'm a Soul Reaper." And Ichigo's son goes, "Oh yeah, that's neat. By the way, I'm a Soul Reaper too." And the last line that brings Bleach to a close, that ends this long saga that spans several decades is, "What?"
And thus Kubo brought his entire series full circle with the one-word description of his masterpiece.
In some ways, it was a complete letdown and a rushed conclusion. In other ways, it was the perfect ending.
It really was. I guess on the note of that absolute absurdity, since back in the day I was the Bleach guy and you were the Naruto guy, I guess I should close off on some parting thoughts as to why I ever got into this nonsense in the first place, and why, despite everything, I stuck with it until the end, in spite of the toll it took on my sanity. I just want to establish this one last time. I loved the supporting cast, and, Aizen aside, I really enjoyed the villain crews except for the last one. I mean, as protagonists go, I really enjoyed Rukia, really enjoyed Renji, desperately wanted Orihime to do something, desperately wanted Ishida to do something, desperately wanted Kubo to remember that Chad exists. And as I have already established, I thought that Ulquiorra, and for that matter the rest of the top for Espada, were badasses. What let it down for me was that they all lost their spotlights to Ichigo again and again and again, and I wouldn't mind that so much if he wasn't boring.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm getting at is that what let it down for me was disappointment, because up until about halfway through the Hueco Mundo saga, I loved Bleach, and then the rest of Bleach happened.
Yeah, that is kind of the sad part. I mean, yeah, Bleach had a large cast, but we were still really gripped on it. And we were still going, "Oh, I'm really hoping we get to see insert named here's Bankai." And I think the last time we really sparked interest was, "Oh my god, they finally revealed Rukia's Bankai."
Yeah, and admittedly, the way by which she learned it was ridiculous, but I mean, I liked it. That was the last time I liked anything in Bleach that didn't involve me laughing at it.
Yeah.
But I figure that here at the end, I'd close off with at least a reminder that there were things that I did like about Bleach until it extended its welcome by about 5 years.
Yeah, that's really the best way to sum it up. It did give us some enjoyment, and like I said, there are still really effective moments in the early arcs, but whenever we talk about manga, I always end up bringing Nobuhiro Watsuki, the writer of Rurouni Kenshin, somehow. And the reason why is that I keep thinking back, especially in stuff like this, there was a series which I've been thinking about reviewing, but haven't decided yet, called Rurouni Kenshin Restoration, which was essentially a shortened remake of Rurouni Kenshin. And in it, he says a very significant quote.
"It was out of respect for the fans that I decided to end Rurouni Kenshin when it did. I wanted to end the series whilst it was still popular and cherished by the fans."
If Bleach had done that, if it had ended after the Aizen arc, or maybe if, like the anime, it had ended after the Fullbringer arc, it would have at least been okay. But the problem is, it just kept going, it kept pushing it, it kept going, "Hey, you better wait and see what I've got hidden up my sleeve," and it turned out to be the same hand that had cost him all of the previous poker games and his baby's milk money.
That's just about the best way of putting it.
So on that note...
On that note, if, like me, you still have some passing affection for Bleach, I recommend that you keep an eye on fanfiction.net, because now that this nonsense is finally over, I can start writing an AU of it that hopefully brings better closure for those of us who wished the last arc hadn't happened. But yeah, that aside, those are our thoughts. A series that had promise and that kept our attention for the majority of its run, but was let down by the fact that its mangaka could not let go.
Basically, yeah.
Admittedly, I understand that, but there's a reason to all things come an end.
Indeed, yes. And now we move on to our final section, which is
Quickfire reviews.
This is the section where we review everything else we read, watched, or played, but within the maximum time limit of 60 seconds. I only have one thing to review, which is kind of a blessing, given that, well, we've just been ranting for hours about a one manga, so...
Yeah, in fact, we're coming up on the 2-hour mark just now, so I think it's also a blessing that I have nothing. Take it away, Jonin.
Rightio.
Tales of Xillia 2, the sequel to, well, Tales of Xillia. The main conflict revolves around time dimension and techno-babble nonsense, but it's still pretty cool to see all of the characters again, see how they developed, and the combat system is still as fun as ever. The problem being, the world design is kind of lazy in that 90% of it is literally Tales of Xillia 1's world, right down to the exact same dungeons and maps lifted, and 2, I really want to slap some common sense into the person who thought the best way to encourage people to do side quests was to put your main character in debt, and then to have someone demanding loan payments. Why, dude?
Oh god, I've heard of that. Why would you do that?
Yeah, it really wasn't the best idea in the world, but... on the note of weird JRPG loan sharks, that ends this month's Monkey broadcast. If you have any opinions on anything we discussed, feel free to leave them in the comments section. That's what it's there for. Although I do want to give one caveat to some of the more passionate Bleach fan bases. It doesn't matter if you explain a plot hole, that still doesn't mean the story moment wasn't shite.
Yeah, pretty much. Although at this point I'm pretty sure there are fewer rabid Bleach fans than there are dodos.
You say that, but if you look at Weekly Manga Recap, which is an awesome manga podcast, I'd recommend checking out, half of the comments are always talking about Bleach, and on top of that, apparently Bleach fans during the last week, despite the fact that it had already been scheduled and planned, were trying to kick up a storm on Shonen Jump's Facebook page to try and give Bleach another month or so to finish.
Why would you do that? As you can tell, we've ranted so long, my voice is dying.
Yeah, so it's probably for the best we go to recharge our batteries for October and the Halloween Monkey broadcast. But until next time, I've been the Jonin Monkey.
And I've been Sven the Crusader. Rest well your substitute badges, friends. We've earned it.
That was Monkey Broadcast, a monthly review and discussion show hosted by the Jonin Monkey and Sven the Crusader. If you feel you've been the subject of slander or that your copyright is misused, send an email to thejoninmonkey@yahoo.co.uk. For more news and media reviews, follow me on Twitter @thejoninmonkey and go to thejoninmonkey.podbean.com for previous podcasts and MP3 downloads. All music used belongs to the original owners. Until next month, have fun, kids!